And so, the war had come to this. A man on a bridge with the power to destroy. The twos had consumed the east. The fives owned the west. The fours had what lay in between. The zeros, the ones, the threes, slaves for the most part. No, we don't call them slaves. There is no such thing as a slave these days, but they can't own property, or any property worth owning, which amounts to just about the same thing. Just try to get into a school as a three. Now those of us who live in what once were 0, 1, and 3 lands have been rather tolerant. But let a 3 show up in the east, or a 0 in the west, they'd have their nuts handed to them. Of course, when you can't own property, there's not much worth living for, save for what passes between a man and a woman. And so the lines have not died out the way that some might have hoped. Then there are those who insist that they should have all just been killed, then and there. While we still had the chance, perhaps the best thing would have been to get rid of them altogether. But we could still label them as a threat. And, in a way, they were a threat, at least as far as we were concerned. We needed space. Everybody needs space. We were running out of numbers. There were 99,999,999 of us. Or thereabouts. Okay, time for a little history lesson. 287 million. That's the nationwide population at around the turn of the millennium. Rather manageable number, I would think. Not all that much different from what we've got now. About half, and hardly worthy of concern, were it not for Social Security numbers. You see, some numbers are better than others, and we were running out of the better ones. The arrogant fives didn't even try to keep their plans from us. After all, we had to receive the toxic stuff, so we had to know what rails it was coming in on, if only to have adequate security in place. Their assumption was that no one could penetrate their territory far enough to bomb the caravan before it was in range of destroying the entire East along with it. They never counted on a man with no tattoo. We are an elite group of commandos, my brothers and I, borrowed from the ranks of what once were threes. Some 24 years ago, my mother was approached by government agents. Abandoned by my father before I was born, my mother was offered a deal, a home and some money in exchange for her boy. Her boy would be brought up under the best of circumstances on a military campus. I was trained to fight, to run, and to believe in the cause. I was a success at all three. My brothers and I had no tattoos. Brought up in seclusion, our tattoos were held in abeyance until such time as we were to be given our assignments. Some of us might be sent on missions to Virginia, others to California, or 2-land and 5-land respectively. I look down at my hand, and I see my freshly minted number. 589007693. Albert Gardner. They had to create a criteria. Just a single, little, stupid, meaningless, pissant criteria. Didn't even really matter which one they chose. Any odd, idle, irrelevant, stinking criteria would do it. It was nothing more than an administrative shortcut. Some clerk somewhere thought it would be easier to keep the numbers this way rather than that way. Some lousy, stinking clerk, lost in the annals of the dark ages of history, assigning Social Security numbers. The zeros and ones never had a chance. It all goes back to the days of the terror. Or I should say the days when terror resurfaced as a way of life. And when it's a way of life, it really isn't terror anymore. More like anxiety. An ongoing, underlying anxiety, constantly reminding you of the fragility of it all, that it can all end tomorrow. Of course, it always can. Always could. But you really have to go back to those days to see how Social Security numbers got so damn important. Of course, Social Security itself went out of business 200 years ago when we split off into 6 unions. Security, huh? But in relatively short order, at least in evolutionary or geological terms, the numbers conquered the being. I mean, you look back at films from those days and you can really see distinctions between people. Black people who are really, black. White people who are entirely pale. Asians, Hispanics, I mean, you can really tell the difference. Weird. I suppose it's not surprising that there was racial prejudice back then. I mean, after all, you knew who was. And as long as there are distinctions between groups, groups will naturally gravitate to their own. That's probably worth repeating. As long as, fuck it. It was the tattoos more than anything that set things in motion. Of course, they are second nature. Well, no, they're first nature now. But back then it was a revelation. I mean, for a while they tried to make the thing work with ID cards. And they put all sorts of gizmos in these cards for protection. Holograms, fingerprints, retinal scans, DNA codes. It all got very expensive, you see, because every time you add another gizmo at one end, you have to add more equipment at the other. And not every shopkeeper or grade school could afford their own lab just to tell whether you're somebody who has any business being there or not. A card can be stolen. But a tattoo on your palm? Not much anybody can do to falsify that. People try, of course. But when they make the penalty for altering your number the loss of your hand, people tend to stick with their lot in life. Stealing an identity meant losing your identity. And without an identity, who are you? Nobody. Apparently, Albert Gardner died 17 years ago without an heir. They'll be reassigning his number any day now, but for now I am him. It's amazing how accustomed the authorities are to dead people showing up. No union has a monopoly on bureaucratic mistakes, and so when the checkpoints pronounce me dead, I simply sigh, roll my eyes, and present my paperwork, self-evidently alive. If they need any further explanation, I simply speculate that some guy with a single digits difference must have died. Some clerk killed me off with a typo. So far, I've managed to avoid the official checkpoints. Of course, everywhere you go, you have to show your tattoo. It is, after all, part of the shaking hands ritual. But that's just a formality. They don't generally log you into a database unless you're checking into a hotel, buying a ticket to go somewhere, or pulled into jail on a violation. I like my hands where they are. And I plan on keeping them in place, at least for the next 72 hours. Then, I'll be part of the cosmic ether, and a matter of legend. The sorting. There had been a time when you could be born one place, go away to school someplace else, and get a job all the way across the country somewhere. You'd put down fresh roots and create a home. Except that now you carry that damn number around with you everywhere you go. A number that had suddenly become everyone's business. And we were running out of numbers. Oh, sure. Between zeros, ones, twos, threes, fours, and fives, there were a potential 600 million numbers available. But each union had only a single 100 million to spread among its chosen people who were sharing from an ever-diminishing pool of resources. The California Union has always had it the easiest of them all. 100 million spread over more than half of the country. Having Alaska didn't hurt. Well, then there were the expansion arguments. I mean, after all, a number was just a number, right? Why not open the game up to 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s? Mathematically, no issue. But who wants to go first, huh? Anybody want to raise their kids as the only 6s in a union of 4s? Take a chance on the notion that people will be tolerant? Or decimals. There's a lot of decimals out there, fractions they call them. Might as well hang a sign around their neck that says bastards. Turned out to be the most effective birth control method ever. What's more is, every now and again, a grandparent will die, mysteriously, just before a fraction is about to be born. Each family gets a single generation to reclaim a number before it goes back into the pool, and it never stays in the pool for more than a second. Decimals are more common among the zeros, the ones, and the threes, although they're still very much frowned upon. In certain governments, notably the twos, who have the least amount of territory but still host 3 indigenous populations, get a little nervous about any increase in opposing population bases. It seems that when, periodically, the decimal population goes up, so does the prison population, which is, not surprisingly, composed almost exclusively of zeros, ones, and threes. Anyway, there was that very ugly period of the sorting during which the various numbers discovered they just couldn't live with each other. The property was too valuable, and the outplaced were too vulnerable. Homes were torched and reoccupied. The victims would flee, generally to their state of birth where they were safe, and when they arrived, unless they came well-funded or had family still in the area, they generally found the doors closed. How often did people leave behind multi-million-dollar homes only to find themselves sleeping on a cot in a shelter? It was a disruptive period of perhaps 6 or 7 years before we were all finally reunited with zeros, ones, twos, threes, fours, and fives, all in their places. And by the time that was complete, there was no need for a United States anymore because, well, we weren't united anymore. Of course, for a while, you could still travel from one union to another, but you really wouldn't want to go out in public. The need for secrecy has kept me in close quarters for my entire life. There are less than 50 people who even know of my existence. The campus where we live is perhaps 3 walled-in acres of a former airbase, now serving as a police and border patrol facility. I never even saw the rest of the facility until they brought me out to begin the mission. Of course, you see the digitals depicting life in the outside world all the time, and many of them are still made in California, which accounts for the moral laxity of the subject matter. But just seeing regularly spaced houses, parks, and even forest preserves was astounding. I felt a surge of patriotism. This was the land that I was fighting for. Back east, of course, they had no such luxury. And the digitals depicting life in the East were always gritty, angry, claustrophobic affairs. Their close proximity shortens their fuse. The other side of this, of course, is the great love and passion generally depicted in their relationships. Seems they have a lot of spaghetti dinners and never quite wind up getting eaten. None of this could prepare me for what I was to face out west. Smuggled across the ex-Kansas border just south of Wichita, I made what miles I could during the night hours. I had studied maps and topographical surveys for the past year. I anticipated every rise and fall of the landscape. I knew what to expect, at least until the sun came up. The concept of infinity cannot be grasped in the abstract. I had some exposure to the concept. At night, I could look above me and see the starscapes and imagine the many worlds and universes stretching away endlessly. I had simply never applied the same concept to the land. As the sun rose behind me, the landscape exposed itself before me, and I constantly awaited what I consciously knew would not appear, the wall at the border of the next parcel. Instead, there were farmhouses, set back perhaps a quarter mile from the highway itself reaching ahead, a concrete ribbon, just as they describe it in the song, disappearing into the distance, a rippling wash of green and gold. I kept moving, running when I felt secure, walking when I thought someone might be watching me. I had about a week to make the trip, and I knew that harsh terrain awaited me at the far end. So I started out by pushing myself, taking on at least 100 miles a day. Occasionally, I would come across rivers and canals, and away from the highway, I would take the opportunity to strip down and rinse out my running clothes. Trading these for my walking costume, I would hang shorts and shirt from my belt, allowing these to dry while continuing on at a lighter pace. The incursions. Virginia first set its sights to the south, occupying Puerto Rico, which for some reason had been set up as a 5 back in the Dark Ages. Not only was it strategically unnecessary to the California Union, it was probably a burden on them as well. From there, it was on to New Jersey, which the New York Union seemed particularly unenthused about protecting. It became evident to everyone that Virginia's ultimate goal was the entire eastern seaboard, but they had so isolated their targets that it became virtually impossible for the 3s or the 4s to come to the aid of Pennsylvania and later New York without first crossing this 2 territory in Ohio. Instead, and this is the decision that has shaped the hostility of the past 2 centuries, the other unions began to look hungrily at each other. If Virginia was making a superpower of itself, and California already was, then the 3s and the 4s would be the next target. One or the other would need to get bigger, fast. And while the 3s and 4s together might well take on all comers and even drew up treaties to that effect, neither one felt that they could trust the other. It was the 4s, the Texas Union, that moved first, cutting Illinois and Indiana of the O'Hare Unions off at the knees. From Iowa to Kentucky, both territories that they already possessed, the Texas planters drew a line and made their advance. Meanwhile, the old Minnesota force crossed the Mississippi River, cutting off the western bend of Wisconsin. It all sounds so simple now, but it was perhaps 100 years of incursion, treaty, occupation, treaty, violation, treaty, and further incursion. Every time the Texans seemed satisfied, they would find another territory to occupy, be it the Upper Peninsula of Michigan or Western Ohio. Every 10 years or so, they would grasp for another 10% of what remained until the central hub of O'Hare was the last piece to fall. Need I point out that blood was spilled? Terror was the weapon of choice, and these proud Northerners were not so eager for slavery. The mistake that every occupying force seems to make is in creating a devalued life for the natives. When you make life no longer worth living, you invite terrorism. Be it bombers, snipers, kidnappers. The sharper the decline in the quality of life, the greater the increase in guerrilla activity. No one knows just how the bombers got through to Dallas, but the Cohen brothers were whispered heroes throughout the occupied O'Hare territories for the better part of a decade. Over the years, there were minor reckonings to be made, and it was the former Panhandle states that seemed to fare the worst. Oklahoma reached too far into perceived California territory, as did western Texas. Western Florida had to be amputated from its former peninsula, and the odd serrated edge created by Tennessee and Kentucky's perceived intrusion into Virginia territory had to be adjusted. Up in the Northeast, many of the Zeros fled into Canada, and the Canadians took them. They need their slaves too. Food, a canteen, 1 change of clothes, ID cards, the components of a tiny device, and sunblock. I was traveling light. I had about a week to make the trip, and there would be no way of carrying sufficient food to sustain me. With the energy I would be expending, I would need at least 30 to 40 pounds of nutrition to sustain me, and carrying such load would make the running, already a challenge, virtually impossible. It was not the weight so much as the bulk. So for the meantime, I stuck to the menu provided, consuming most of the stores that I was carrying. The goal was to get far from the border and the presumably more suspicious homesteaders before allowing myself the pleasure and the convenience of a public diner. It would be the first such diner that I had ever eaten in, personally. Little did I realize the consequences of such a stop. I had left Kansas behind and was entering the town of Lamar. My running clothes were washed, dried, and packed away. My pack was 15 pounds lighter than when I had started. Fortunately, well-trimmed beards and closely cropped hair were in fashion, so I didn't have to pack extra toiletries for their upkeep. I was, however, noting the impact that the running was having on my skin. The sunblock was sweating off quickly after application, and the portions left exposed were turning a deeper red. The concern was that sunburn was clearly not the style of choice, and anyone who cared to notice would know that I had been outside without protection. Well, so be it. I have to eat. And for once, I am in a town, and I feel safe. So, 3 unions, each perhaps half the width of the union to its immediate west, with more or less smooth edges. And now the nuclear waste was coming back. Somebody thought they had sealed it up for good a few centuries back. Well, there was that little fault line not far from Yucca Mountain. The containers themselves were unbroken, but the vault had cracked, and now all bets were off. It gave the Fives the opportunity to reverse what they had always considered to be a rather egregious decision. Perhaps when we were all one United States, it made sense to have a single storage facility, all your eggs in one basket, as it were. But now Pandora's box was open, and the nukes were going home. There was nothing that the 2s or the 4s could do about it. The wind prevails out of the west. An attack from the east would create a spill which would send the fumes right over Texas and Virginia. The best they could hope for would be to graciously receive the toxic stuff, delicately redirecting it to storage facilities of their own. Of course, nothing much gets shipped these days. Having run out of coal and oil long ago, we're now left with solar, wind, and nuclear. People have learned to work from home or within a mile or two of where they live. The 0s, 1s, and 3s, of course, live in the homes of their masters. The 2s, the 4s, and 5s. If anything does need shipped anywhere, it's usually food. And this, of course, gives the California Union yet another advantage: more sun. Not only do they have nearly twice the amount of territory of the other unions put together, but they get their energy largely for free. They are a lazy, self-serving, self-indulgent race. They've grown soft, negligent, self-assured. Left to their own devices, they will continue to prosper even as their souls decline in neglect. They will maintain their 2,000 square foot homes with no conquered peoples to care for, while their population holds steady at just over 100 million. Our 2 great nations provide for the refugees of the 0 wars, the 1 wars, and the 3 wars, and now the 5 ship to us the stinking refuse of the nuclear neglect of a bygone era. They go back on their previous commitments. Given their economic situation, they will one day turn their attention east and roll right over us. They must go. Hi, honey. Have a seat. I'll be right with you. The waitress's greeting was a bit startling. I don't suppose I had been called honey before. Ever. And certainly she had never seen me before. In fact, she had barely looked up. This was going to take some getting used to. I checked out the array of seating options, and a distant booth along the window seemed both comfortable and secure, far enough away from the door and yet with a view of the street. Of course, there was a door next to the booth, which would imply an alternate escape route should an emergency arise. Well, of course, the notion of an emergency was impossible. If I were found out, there would be no escape. My only choice would be to quickly assemble the device and destroy any evidence of my existence. Well, that, of course, would mean failure. And there was no room for failure in the face of the 5s and their bloated, godless existence. What do you have, honey? A cup of coffee? Yes, please. Honey? I added that last as an afterthought. I didn't want to seem cold or unacquainted with local customs, but it clearly drew her attention. She glanced back at me with a curious smile. I chastised myself for the slip. And when the waitress returned, she seemed to see me for the first time, her mouth opening wide. Oh, honey, you been outside? Look at that neck! Oh, it's nothing, just a little outdoor work. Well, put on the sunblock. That's a red just this side of skin cancer. We can't have that. Oh, yeah, I keep forgetting to put it on. It sweats off and I need to keep reapplying. Well, you need some aloe or something for that. I got some up at the front counter. No, really, that's cream or sugar with your coffee. You got sugar? I caught myself the moment it had slipped out of my mouth. Damn that woman, she'd made me forget where I was. I knew that sugar was plentiful in 5-land as they received it directly from Hawaii. Even the 2s had sugar from Florida and Puerto Rico, but the Texas Union had no such supply, and my surprise at their supply would immediately reveal me as an outsider. Between sunburn and sugar, might as well have walked in announcing myself as a spy. Here you go, honey. Thanks. You know what you want to eat yet? Of course, the menu. You order things! Not just yet. All right, well, just give me a holler. I'm such a fool. I contemplated leaving now, making the remainder of the trip on an empty stomach. Used sparingly, I could stretch the provisions for another couple of days. I mean, I would need water, but I was finding water fairly regularly. Yes, I could do it. But to leave now would be to draw even more attention to myself. My mistakes would be amplified. He didn't even eat, the waitress would report. Honey came in here, not knowing about sugar, not knowing about the menu. Darling was beat red from the sun. He's clearly not one of us. And thus would the authorities be alerted. Nope, I had to see it through. A bell rang as the door opened. Hi, honey, have a seat anyway. I'll be right with you. Another honey. Were they all honeys to her? Clearly, this was a frivolous, degenerate society. The sleazy hostess was the love plaything to every passerby who came through her shop. The broad-shouldered trucker headed back my way, and I watched, horrified, as rather than staking out his position at the opposite end of the diner, he was going to invade my own personal space and take the table right next to mine. Not the next booth, which would at least leave him facing in the opposite direction, but the table to my immediate left, where I would remain subject to his scanning gaze. He smiled, the self-satisfied smile of the bloated elite. Howdy! Howdy! Hi! I replied. Why had no one taught me the proper reply to a howdy? Unfazed, the trucker continued to sit down, still smiling the bloated smile of satisfaction. Pretty broad day out there today, huh? See, you got some sun on you. Damn! Was it that obvious? Why not just wear a name tag that said Mad Bomber? Yep! I squeezed out helplessly. Here you go, honey. I knew I had some aloe up front. Oh, thank you. What do I owe you? She just called me honey. After her latest honey had arrived. Did she have no shame? Thanks. What do I owe you? Oh, don't you worry about it, darling. You just cover up. Hurts me just to look at you. That was an insult, I suppose. But I managed to smile, even as I uncapped the tube. So, you know what you want to eat yet? Again, how much longer would this torture go on? I had neglected to look at the menu yet again. Not just yet. Oh, well, you just take it down. Honey, you know what you want to eat? She had turned her attention to the trucker. Why don't you give me the Denver omelet, sweetheart? Well, they never stop with their endearments. Good choice, honey. Coming right up. Oh, and darling, don't forget to do your ears. Here, let me see that. She took the tube back out of my hands and proceeded to apply the stuff to my ears. Is this how the food industry was run in this degenerate society? Did food handlers routinely massage the ears of their clientele before having such brazen audacity? Although I have to admit that it felt fairly good. All right, honey, now your neck. Oh, this is gonna peel. What you been wearing outside? Fortunately, that seemed to be a rhetorical question. All right, now your hands. Oh, and your arms from the looks of it. I'm going to trust you to do that. Honey, can you take an eye on this one? He seems to need looking after. You got it, doll. There seemed to be no end to their array of syrupy nicknames. All right, let me get that Denver omelet in for you, sugar. She headed for the cook's window. You know, I'll have the Denver omelet too. I spoke up, not wanting to order anything but the established entree. Good choice, honey. Coming right up. I had barely caught my breath before. So, where are you headed? The trucker was just as intrusive as the waitress! If he was going to start touching my ears, I was going to run. Heading out to Durango. Got a job lined up there, planting some trees. At least I had my cover story straight, and my 5 accent was flawless. Job out in Durango, huh? Not bad. Where are you coming from? Wichita! Oh, that's quite a move. You walk that whole way? Yeah, it's a nice walk. Nice! You done walked 300 of the most boringest, most interminablest miles in the known universe. Why didn't you hitch? Hitch? Sure, folks would be happy to give you a ride. Just how decadent was this society? What kind of idiots would willingly open their vehicles to attack? I'm enjoying the walk-in. Well, you're a better man than I, that's all I can say. Look, least you can let me do is give you a ride as far as Alamosa. Oh, no, I couldn't. No, really, I'm heading that way anyway. I deliver a load of grain down to Santa Fe, but, I got a passenger seat standing empty. Here you go. Denver omelet should be right out, sugars. Oh, the waitress again. You taking care of him, sugar? Trying to, doll. He's a stubborn one, though. I can see that. Has he at least done his arms yet? Not only has he not done his arms, but he's refused my offer of a ride twice now. Oh, honey, am I going to have to take you on myself? No, ma'am. I said, not really knowing what taking me on Then you're going to have to show me that you're capable of taking care of yourself. I mean, here you are burnt to a crisp, and this nice fella's offering to take you in out of the sun for a while, and By the way, who are you calling ma'am? I'm sorry? Last fella came in here calling me ma'am, got a cup of hot coffee right in his lap. I'm sorry. Honey? That's more like it. Now you will take this nice fella's ride and we'll hear no more about it. Yes, ma'am. Sugar. That's it, sweetheart. I was drowning in treacle. Where was that food? Yeah, you're gonna have to get used to Nancy. Once she gets her mind made up, she don't take no excuses. Oh, she had a name! So you, come through here often? Somehow I had to get the focus back off of myself. Yeah, I come through here about twice a week, once when I'm heading out west, and then again when I'm coming back east. Never fail to drop in and see Nancy along the way. Here you go, boys. Nancy had returned with 2 plates of Denver omelets. At least I could fill my mouth and stop giving myself away. All right, honey, now I still haven't seen you do those arms. Oh, I'll get them, I said between forkfuls. Honey, slow down, you're gonna choke yourself. Huh? I looked up to notice that the trucker had yet to take his first bite. These people had dining etiquette issues. When would I stop giving myself away? I mean, life on the campus was nothing like this. 16 men ate 16 identical meals in 8 minutes, with no conversations and no motions. All right, honey, now roll up them sleeves. Let me see them arms. Oh, no, really, I'll get them. You gonna give me trouble, sugar? No. All right then, roll up them sleeves. I'll take care of you. Go on ahead and eat. I rolled up my sleeves, and there were mock gasps of horror from the hostess, protestations and warnings of skin cancer. All right, sugar. Now, how's them legs? You got them covered? Oh, yeah, they're fine. You gonna make me take them trousers down to find out? What, is this how you treat all of your customers? Only the ones flirting with skin cancer, and you seem to be the first one I've seen in 15 years here. You mind if I eat first? Honey? Oh, sure, sugar, you go on ahead and eat, but I ain't let you out that door till I check them legs. George? Yeah, doll? You be my enforcer? He don't go anywhere, right? You got it, doll. I was to be prisoner to their perverted schemes. I was not to escape without first losing my trousers and subjecting myself to another course of her indulgences, and after that, there was simply no way of refusing the ride. Yes, there will be a time during which the land is uninhabitable. Perhaps 20, 50 years and the land will recover and absorb, and then it will be ready for us again. The 4s will inherit the West. There may be some 3s who will run the gauntlet of the Mississippi and the nuclear winter in order to claim homes in the West before it is ready. And frankly, some 5s may survive. The wind projections are for a rare northeaster, but none of the simulations that we've ran so far have forecast a contamination of the former 5 strongholds of Washington or Oregon. I was more than a little discomforted by the attentions of the waitress, who could not resist making inappropriate and embarrassing jokes about my package. I imagine you snickering at what I can only refer to as culture shock. My experience with women had been limited. Virtually non-existent. Were it not for the prostitutes that the government brought in to satiate our less palatable desires. But with them, however, there had been no conversations. They were objects for use, not subjects capable of byplay. I mean, we wore gloves with the prostitutes. None could know that there were tattoo-less government agents waiting to infiltrate enemy territory. And here was this woman, teasing, touching, stooping, before me with her bosoms practically exposed. The trucker, shrugging, smirking, pretend to block the exit while she worked on me. I was captive to their comic torment. All right, sugar, goodbye. Now you be sure to drop back in and see me on your way back. Maybe next time you won't be in such a hurry, and I can give you a little lotion where it counts. I struggled to laugh off her pathetic flirtation, and yet, I hate to admit it, but some part of me didn't want to have to rush off quite so quickly. I regretted that there would in fact be no way back from my mission. Of course, I immediately shamed myself for dangerous thinking. Certainly I needed to do what I must in order to fit in among these self-absorbed dilettantes. My desire to stay and trade barbs with this woman was simply an extension of the role that I was playing. I was in character, as it were. And as long as I was in character, certainly I would enjoy her flirtations, her attentions, her handiwork. But the mission lay before me, and she lay behind me. I prayed that George would not be as chatty in the truck as he was in the restaurant. What? That all you got with you? He said as I put my pack into the front seat. Yeah, a traveling light, I said, hoping he wouldn't bring it up again. Well, hope you got another change of clothes waiting for you at the other end. The wide open highway was even more impressive at 40 miles an hour. I glanced out at the passing landscape, quietly thrilled at the walking distance that he was saving me. If I could avoid giving myself away, he would shave 2 days of walking off of my trip, allowing me to stroll at a leisurely pace into Durango. The landscape had begun to rise and fall into rolling hills, and while intellectually I knew what was coming, there was no intellectual way of preparing me for the moment. Nothing that could prepare anyone for that moment. I let out a gasp. What, first time you seen mountains, boy? Who, man? You thought Kansas was pretty. Yeah, well, you know, I've seen the digitals. Never really quite the same thing, though. So, where have you been all these years? At home, taking care of my family. My mother's been ill. Well, you leave her at home all alone there? No, she, died. Actually, yeah, a couple months back. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, son. What, no one else to keep you around? Wife? Kids? Oh, no, I never really, fell in much with the women. What, handsome fella like you? You ain't gay, are you? No! All right, no need to get freaky on me, just checking. I'd forgotten about the decadent permissiveness that had overtaken this society. I mean, sex and sexuality were considered legitimate topics for conversation. I was going to have to suspend my reflexive moral indignance if I wanted to avoid giving myself away. Sorry, just got a little excited there. That's all right. Because if you're not, you should really drop back in on Nancy there. She seemed interested, and a woman like that ought to have a nice